up first, let's take a look. We are doing this Pope watch. We are watching this Pope. Richard, what is going on? Tell us about this Pope watch.
Yeah, very, very big news in this particular Pope watch. Pope Benedict the 16th, Joseph Ratzinger, I can never say that name, Ratzinger. So it's a very bad KFC burger. He's dead. Now, if you were to make a list of the worst popes in history, you might go with Alexander the Sixth, who bought the papacy, killed most of the cardinals, had sex with anything he could see, and then put his family in the cardinal positions. Or you might go with, let's say, Boniface the Eighth, who caused a massive, massive crisis in the church and state by trying to take the state's power away and the armies of the monarchs, leading to some of the most violent wars in history. Or maybe Urban II is someone who you would put forward, who, in an attempt to close the schism between the Catholics and the Orthodox Church, while outperforming a rival pope, gave a speech along the lines of, those Muslim guys in the Holy Land, why don't we go and kill them and a few Jewish people along the way, triggering the First Crusade? Now, these people are all pretty awful popes, but I think Benedict the 16th can go along with that list. He was a monster, a Nazi sympathizing, homophobic, misogynistic, paedophile protecting, backwards, vile piece of work. He stood for everything I personally despise: tradition for tradition's sake, the oppression of LGBTQ plus people, the subjugation of women, and the idea that secularization and rationalism are bad things. Basically, I'm not entirely sure him being dead is a bad thing. So obviously, I mourn his passing. Am I alone in that view, Helen?
Do you mourn his passing?
No.
Do you?
No.
So, again, another person in a prestigious place of power, and they using that power to protect their privilege and also to protect the people that are doing horrible things within that privilege. Say it isn't so. Please say it isn't so. Listen, this mofo Ratsberger, and I emphasis on the rat, the type of person that he was, is that he is one of the worst people in modern history as far as the papacy goes. And because for the simple fact that this piece of shit, like, supposedly represented morality, he was like, best buddies with the Sky Daddy, and he basically said that, like, condoms weren't any good to help AIDS for people in Africa. LGBTQ people are like subhuman. That women's role is to be subservient men, like, and was bigoted, and it just goes on and on and on. And for me, as a former Catholic, and I remember when I was Catholic when Benedict was Pope, I didn't really understand that the nuances of what that meant, because you just went to church and you did all the things that you're supposed to do. But coming out of it, I completely denounce the Catholic Church and what they stand for. And I know we have new cool Pope. That's a little bit more progressive, that you can love your gay kids. But I talked about this before on this program about not that not being the best thing. Just because you love your kids doesn't mean they're accepted and within the wider community. So I really hope that Ratsberger, rat again, he's a rat, that he goes down as one of the most disgusting, backwards people. And when we look at him, when our children and our grandchildren and future generations look back at him as an example of the type of people we don't want to be. SR,
Yeah.
give me your opinion on, are you in mourning? Let me know.
Yeah, this I started off my notes by saying this is one of those moments where, like, I think to myself, I'm really never happy to see a person die, but I really don't feel upset at all. So I mean, I remember when old Benny abdicated, right? And it was like, this was such a big deal. This was such a big shakeup. Like, first time a pope has done this in like 150 years, blah, 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 blah. And so, as I was writing my notes, I was like, what should we talk about exactly? Because there's just so much here. Like, for instance, we could talk about the fact that there was a time in history while he was the pope where he specifically pointed out and bashed a group of nuns in the US for, as he said, quote, focusing too much on poverty and economic injustice. So a man who supposedly follows a doctrine from an all-powerful deity of like charity and like compassion, he said that people were focusing too much on poverty. So that's a really interesting point.
Mm.
I thought about, maybe we should talk about the nickname that he had, God's Rottweiler,
Yeah.
because of his dogmatic, intensely conservative, traditional views. I mean, it for me, there was just so much crap, and it's hard to know exactly what is the most upsetting thing about
Mhm.
his time as pope, right? Is it the, thousands and thousands of documents that have come out now that has shown that he purposefully was asking for, church secrecy on all the sexual assault allegations and all of the victims and everything, purposefully spending millions of dollars of the Catholic Church's money and helping to set up a fund specifically for those individuals that were accused of this? Like I don't know. It's hard to know what the absolute worst thing is, but there sure is a lot to choose from, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Richard, any other thoughts?
For me, the worst thing he did, to misquote Stephen Fry, is to say, you know what, HIV and AIDS are really, really bad, but they're not as bad as condoms. And then parts of the world, like parts of Africa that don't have access to retrovirals, cause the death of possibly millions. Possibly. That's why I put him at the top of that list of bad popes, because they killed a lot of people, but he seems to have taken it to a whole new level. And it's horrific, because I used to work in a department that tries to get drugs to people in that part of the world, and they still say, well, I can't use a condom because the Catholic Church says I can't. So that's why I have HIV, and my former wife has HIV, and my current wife has HIV, and my kids have HIV, and why we're probably going to die because we can't afford the drugs. And so that, for me, is the one that really gets to me. The others are awful as well. The child abuse is terrible. I mean, there's this big pile of bad here that makes him just, yeah. But I think that, yeah, that's the one that gets me, probably because I've been part of it. I've worked in it, but and I've seen the effects of it. But yeah, he's a piece of work. And to see him finally pass away wasn't exactly heartbreaking.
Yeah, I sure didn't lose sleep.
No.
No.
Helen, any other thoughts?
Because he was the one that was Pope when the sexual abuse scandal broke.
Yeah.
And I remember living in New Hampshire when that happened. And my CCD priest ended up committing suicide when those allegations started to come out. And I'm a sex abuse survivor, not from the Catholic Church, but just a survivor. And this was the nail in the coffin moment that brought me out of the church. The fact that he took no responsibility,
Yeah.
he knew this was happening, and he protected these priests that were targeting and victimizing children. And there's no excuse for that anymore. And I've talked to Catholics, and they try to be all apologetic about it. And they try to have it both ways, where like we can condemn pedophiles for being horrible, but they still want to remain an organization that hasn't done really anything to appease and do right by the victims. They're still trying to save face. They're still trying to pretend this didn't happen. And I want to point out too, like we talked about this before, where the Catholic Church was complaining that, people are becoming more secular. It's because you are not doing what you claim that your God should be, merciful and kind. You are not walking the walk, mofos, and people are done.
Yeah.
And he just left that legacy behind. And like I said, I'm like, I really hope that as we go forward, people look back on him and be like, I don't want to be like that guy. because he did not represent kindness and compassion and hope and healing to people that have been in difficult situations. That's the way I look at it. Any
Yeah.
other thoughts, SR, on this?
Yeah, I totally agree on that, and I think, and we've seen, this type of thing happen a lot in, varying religious spaces. But one of the things that just really upsets me, is because I think it's just so gross, is how, um, he ended up, formally asking the Catholic Church as an organization, to pardon him for all the atrocities of covering up the sexual abuse, that he knew full and well about. We know this now, and that to me is just infuriating.
Mm.
That is one of the biggest reasons why I am on here and talking about this stuff and pushing back against these garbage ideals, is because what it does is it gives somebody the thought in their head that instead of actually trying to do something for the victim, exactly what you were saying, Helen, just purposefully not doing shit. Instead, it gives them the idea that they can just clear their conscience just by asking old
Mm.
Sky Daddy, you know? So that's just infuriating to me. And I really just I really just don't want people to forget this, which is the way that the Pope gets chosen in the Catholic Church is that all the high up, big muckety mucks that are the bishops and whatnot, they all vote, okay? And
Hmm.
Pope Benny wasn't in charge very long, okay? Meaning that when they voted him in, there was enough people that fully agreed with his positions. So don't be confused by
Mm.
by the pretty trimmings and the nice words that our current old Frankie says, because they ain't different. The church hasn't freaking changed, and that's why they elected Sky Daddy's puppy a few years ago, and that's why they haven't really changed any of their stances today, even though Frankie comes out every so often and
Yeah.
tries to sound nice about it. Richard,
I was just
anything
going to
else?
say, amongst those people who voted him in was the current Pope, because it has to be
Hmm.
unanimous. So he will have voted for him as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to say he's completely different, he obviously at one point thought, yes, taking us in a radical extremist direction is the right thing to do.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's a nasty business, his time as Pope, and also this whole thing about I'm going to give up being the Pope. Well, weren't you chosen by God to be God's right hand man? So how does that work? You just quit. So I'm not doing it anymore. God, I'm sure his thing is I got a message from God, like one of the Blues Brothers or something, and said so now I've got to give it up.
Mhm.
So another one of God's mistakes there. Wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. Good old omniscient and
Yeah.
infallible God again. Helen, any other thoughts before we move on?
I I just it's one of those things that I keep seeing, the Catholic Church and their own nation, because let's remember the Vatican is its own sovereign government. Let's
Mhm.
not forget that, people. And they have a bunch of men, and I do mean men, people with penises, that think, and most of them are white, that think that certain groups of people are separate from them. And that's the thing that's most distressing about why we're seeing this kind of cowtailing and
Mm.
backpedaling coming from the churches, because one, they know that the numbers are going down, and two is that because of that, they're not getting people in the pews, which means they're not getting many in the
Mm.
coffers. People aren't tithing, and also their influence is going to start to break away. And those of us who are on this side, who are secularists and are skeptics and are saying like, hey, your rhetoric that you're preaching is not matching your actions, and we're done, we're not going to play this game anymore.
Mm.
And I think that is something that we all have to pay attention to, and we have to push back against these bad ideas who are not taking care of people that they've harmed,
Yeah.
and really do the work. You can say you're sorry, but we all know a good
Mm.
apology comes with action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.